It's been over 2.5 years since I first started learning steno, and yet I haven't really incorporated it into my daily computer usage. That is until recently. Now, part of this is because I used to use a laptop exclusively, and so it wasn't always convenient to plug in an external keyboard. It's especially not very portable. So I tend to only use steno when I had to do a lot of typing. But the bigger reason I did not use steno as much was because there were some tasks I was not able to accomplish with a steno keyboard. Last month, however, I had just gotten myself a PC, and I had also been using a Multisteno which, as I'll talk about later, addressed some of these tasks quite nicely. With some additions to Plover and a few firmware changes, I was able to use my Multisteno as my primary keyboard for the last month. And it's been working really well for me. So today I'll be sharing the plugins and dictionaries I've added to Plover, as well as the tweaks to my steno keyboard itself that have allowed me to get to this point. I'll first start off on the Plover side of things. If you use a lot of shortcuts, you should definitely look into dictionaries that allow you to write them systematically on the steno layout. I recommend Emily's modifiers, but other dictionaries like Abby's left-hand modifiers are also available. The nice thing about these dictionaries is that they utilize the left-hand fingerspelling chords, which means if you know how to fingerspell, you will basically know how to write any shortcut involving a letter. Now, I can't mention Emily's modifiers without also bringing up her symbols dictionary. With it, you can write almost any symbol with control over the spacing and capitalization within a stroke. I don't write a ton of symbols, but her dictionary definitely comes in handy when I have to write code, for example. I've made a video on both of her dictionaries in the past, so if you're intrigued, I've linked it in the description below. On the topic of writing code, moving around and editing text is also really important. I've talked about navigation keys in the past, but as a quick summary, you just press a navigation chord with the left hand, and the right hand uses a cluster of keys as arrows. You can get a little more fancy with the shapes for page up, page down, home, and end, and you can also use a different left-hand chord for selecting text. But when you edit text on a regular keyboard, of course, you almost never press a single movement key and just leave it at that. Oftentimes, you might have to tap it over and over to get the cursor to move where you want it to. Writing one of these movement strokes over and over is pretty tedious and inefficient. So instead, I use the Modal Dictionaries plugin. These dictionaries can be configured to temporarily turn on when specific strokes have been pressed. At the same time, these specific strokes also output a regular translation. With a modal dictionary for movement, you can do something like this. I simply just press a single movement stroke once, turning the right-hand cluster into navigation keys on their own. See how I am moving around the text by just tapping keys with my right hand. When I press a stroke that is not in this dictionary, its translation is outputted from the other dictionaries, but the modal dictionary is now turned off. I found this plugin incredibly useful, but I do have to mention that the creator of this plugin has not been actively recommending it. It can sometimes conflict with other plugins such as Plover Clippy and Tapey Tape, since it is apparently kind of a hacky plugin. Personally, I have been using it for months without any issues, so I'd still definitely recommend it for text navigation. You can install this plugin with the Plugins Manager, and I have linked below the modal dictionary I use for movement. But if you are having issues with this plugin, there is another option. If you use a hobbyist steno keyboard, you can modify the firmware so that your keyboard behaves just a little bit different. Now, hobbyist steno keyboards, like professional steno machines, only send the stroke to Plover once all keys have been released. You can change this instead to send a stroke after a single key has been released. So how does this help with navigation? Well, take a look at this. All I am doing is holding down the left-hand navigation chord and tapping a key on the right hand. It's really quite elegant. This functionality is called first up chord send. Now personally, I haven't had much luck with it myself, since it tends to make me misstroke a lot more often when writing normally. But maybe my writing is just very sloppy. I'd still recommend you give it a go. Another commonly applied firmware tweak is double tap chord repeat. As you may have noticed, stroke repetition like you have on regular keyboards is missing from steno machines. This mod enables repeat by double tapping and holding your chord. If you need to repeat a movement stroke many times really quickly, this is the way to go. I've gone over both of these firmware tweaks in a previous video, so definitely check that out if you want to learn how to apply them. By now though, you should have the necessary tools to do most computer tasks with steno, and even coding. With all of these tweaks, I was able to use Steno in my final exam to a Programming in C course. I do actually prefer coding with Steno since my hands don't have to move as much compared to a regular keyboard, and editing texts with Steno is just a breeze. However, there are still some things that Steno alone can't address. First of all, Plover can't start before I have logged in, so I still have to use a regular keyboard for my login password. And secondly, Plover can't hold down modifiers. So for example, holding down Alt and dragging something with your mouse just isn't possible. I do this quite often in image and video editing, and also just to move and resize windows on my desktop. I need to have a keyboard that's capable of Steno and also has a QWERTY layer with the relevant modifiers. This is where my Multisteno in particular comes in real handy. It has a full QWERTY layer and a lot of extra keys that are not strictly needed for Steno. Since I don't use number keys or a number bar, I have plenty of room for the 4 modifiers and other keys I might need. I've added some function keys for accessing the BIOS on my PC and some arrow keys in case I have to move around a grub menu, for example. I've also tweaked the QWERTY layer to my liking so that I have more modifiers in more convenient places. What's really nice about these hobby boards is the customization potential. It is unfortunately a bit involved, requiring editing some C files and compiling firmware and flashing it to your keyboard, but the basic steps are at least documented online, and I've linked QMK's beginner docs in the description. And if you're ever stuck, feel free to hop onto the Plover Discord server and ask for help there. I may also make a video in the future showing how to customize your Steno keyboard's firmware. So with all of these tweaks, are there still some things I am not able to do with just my Multisteno alone? Unfortunately, yes, there is still one thing, but at the same time, it should be pretty obvious that you don't want to be using Steno for this, or even a keyboard with fewer than 40 keys. I am, of course, talking about gaming. Now, I am not a gamer by any stretch of the imagination, but I thought I'd try it out anyway since the Multisteno comes with a QWERTY layer by default. It turns out it's actually pretty enjoyable, at least for certain games. Those that utilize just a few keys like WASD and a few others can probably be 100% playable with the Multisteno. I actually added my own gaming layer with these keys in more comfortable positions, and it's worked really well. Though I've only tried it on Minecraft, but even so I love the ortholinear layouts and the light touch. On the other hand, anything that requires access to an entire keyboard will be pretty difficult and frustrating. One game I've been playing a lot of recently is Kerbal Space Program. I couldn't find a way to fit all the useful keys onto the Multisteno, so I tend to just use another keyboard for this. But I play these games in a Windows 10 AME virtual machine, so it's more convenient to have another keyboard dedicated to the VM anyway. I have also tried playing DS games. Here's me playing Mega Man ZX. The controls are a little bit cursed though. I use Vim-like movement keys for the D-pad, thumb keys for the weapons, and every other key is aligned in a row. The reason I aligned everything like that was to limit finger movement, and it also helped make it easier to simultaneously hold down one key while tapping another on the same hand. But overall, if I'm not playing video games, my Multisteno would be the only keyboard on my desk pretty much 100% of the time. The mix of Plover with extra keys for holding down modifiers has worked really well for me, and it's really nice not having a huge keyboard take up so much space. It has of course taken a bit of work to tweak my Multisteno to my liking, and there is also the added annoyance of having to switch layers pretty often. But still, I don't think I'm ever going back to this for anything other than gaming. Then again, I probably won't be doing a lot of that either in 2 weeks. So that's all from me this time. I hope you found this video helpful, and maybe you too will try using a Steno machine as your main keyboard. I'd love to hear about any issues you might have run into. Maybe I'll do a follow-up video. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.